grew up not only evangelical, but in a multi-level marketing commercial cult.
We have no role models. No, we do. We just don't like the ones we have. And the reason we don't like them is because they're also very clearly not taking responsibility for themselves.
Complex PTSD isn't one thing that happens. It's small things that happen, and then they carry on in your body and are pinged over and over again.
Welcome to People Watching, a podcast where we figure out what it looks like to become the role model we've always wanted by talking with real people who found real role models in their own lives. Together, we cut through all the noise and identify better sources of hope, creativity, and wisdom as we explore how we learn to make decisions about the kind of life we want to live. So join us. Let's do some people watching. This is your host, Megan J. Robinson. Welcome to part 2 of our conversation. My guest today is Ashleigh Hill, and I have been so excited for this conversation, I can't even tell you. I met Ashleigh almost 20 years ago at a writers group, and the first thing I learned about her is that she is an amazing poet. She was also managing a band at the time, so, instant cool factor. Ashleigh's background is in public relations, women's and gender studies, and direct service of women's shelters, volunteer service programs, and women-centric research and programming. She currently oversees conference programming and online education for a nonprofit association. And she is a graduate of Messiah College and DePaul University. She loves volunteering with animal rescues. That's how she met her beloved dog, Nellie. And she's always a good source for book and documentary recommendations. Our conversation covered a lot of topics, like growing up in evangelical and cult-like institutions, the complexities of spirituality and identity, and dealing with grief and loss in unexpected ways. I loved hearing Ashleigh talk about how solidarity came to be such a core value for her, and especially how she's learning to deal with the disappointment that comes from failed mentor relationships and role models. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So as we get started, I always love to have our guests read with my guests some touchstones, just some rules that help shape our conversation and our expectations for each other, as well as for our audience. So I'll go ahead and start, and then we could just alternate reading these touchstones. So the first one is whatever we share is by invitation and not obligation. If either of us is not comfortable pursuing a topic, let's just say, I prefer not to share. Thank you.
Silence is also a partner in our conversation. Feel free to take a moment to reflect without immediately filling the space with words. Leave room for the inner teacher to whisper to.
Awesome. Be present as fully as possible. This is a space to acknowledge our doubts, fears, and failings, as much as it is a space to share our joys, convictions, and successes.
Ask open, honest questions. If we're not sure what the other meant in the question or statement, just ask. It gives us a chance to clarify or rephrase. Ask questions that we genuinely don't know the answer to. Surprise is a great catalyst of insight.
Awesome. One of the things, and going back to that kind of disappointment, manipulation, you had recommended that I watch the docuseries LuLaRoe.
Yeah, and I recommend everyone watching this podcast to also watch LuLaRoe on Amazon Prime.
Yeah, or LuLaRich, but it's about LuLaRoe.
Yeah.
I was just, because I think the structure of LuLaRoe, the company, also resonates for you because of your own background, your own family background as well. And so is that part of why LuLaRich resonated for you? Or
I've never really talked about this. We'll see how it goes. But I grew up not only evangelical, but in a multi-level marketing commercial cult. And I think was it in a part of therapy where I was like, I think I should talk about this, but I haven't actively not been talking about it for a long time. And could have been in that. I always felt like when I was with all of my friends who grew up in evangelical culture, you like joke about stuff and you're like, we this was messed up and can you believe this? And then when the conversation was over, I always felt like there was something I was not finished with. And I think I came to terms with the fact that I had like another level of involvement in a high control group. And yeah, I was at the point in talking with a therapist about being like, I want to talk about this, but I don't know how to like, where's the entry point? And I've always been interested in religion and cults and spirituality, blah, 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 etc. Why people believe the way they do, if it's healthy or not. And the fact that everyone's looking to belong to something. And so I watched this documentary called Lula Rich, which is about LuLaRoe, which is another commercial cult or multi-level marketing company. And I was watching it and I literally had to pause it 10 minutes in and was like, this is the same, even though it's different companies. I was like, I know exactly what these people are saying and talking about. And all the language is familiar and everything. And then I watched 20 more minutes and I paused it again and I was like, ugh. It really just hit me. And I like got on my phone, I like messaged my, emailed my therapist. I was like, please watch this documentary before our next meeting. She told me I could do that. I was like, this is what we'll be talking about. Yeah. So I think I watched that. And I think I had been just thinking about this a lot and how much I wanted to talk about this part of my life when we were talking about doing this podcast. And I don't know how much I want to talk about it.
Patient only.
So there's the two founders of that organization who just remind me of so many people in the one that I grew up in who are, I don't really know the right language, but you are the institution. And we talk this way and we participate in these things and we believe this. And it's the language they were using, it was the same language I grew up in. And it was like different than evangelical language that we're all used to if we grew up in that. And this one was like another set of things. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's a different company, but it's the same thing. It's the same cult-like language. And it's the same like thought-stopping beliefs that don't allow for solidarity and and I was just like, I know these people. I don't know these people, but I know these people. I grew up with them. I see them all around. I see how like when I would go to places with my parents where these people were, how like my parents' demeanor would change and they would talk in the same way. Like I remember hearing my dad say something once and being like, what are you talking about? And then later being like, oh, that's how you talk in this company. Like having that realization later. And I just remember things like that happening multiple times where I was like, what's this person saying to me? And then later I'd be like, oh, that's how the company talks. They're not talking to me like I'm their friend's daughter. They're talking to me like someone who's selling that company. And so in part of that documentary, and I think part of this is people who are supposed to be role models and are supposed to be in charge, pretending that they're doing something when they're not, but they think they are.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about what I just said, but there it is.
Yeah.
But I remember in the documentary, there's the couple who founded it and the husband is like, yeah, we go to work every day and our people are there and we're like, how can we help? And then we help. And then that's our job. And I was like, what are you talking about? No one works that way. That's not how you work.
Yeah.
And I was like,
do things.
Yeah. You just, if someone came to my office and was like, can I help? I'd be like, no, go do your own work. In the way that he was talking, what do you mean? You go to someone's office and you just help even though you don't know what they're doing. That I definitely remember that. And he, even in that couple, like that guy spent so much time talking over his wife about stuff. And there's so much of the documentary that is about women do all the work, but men get all the credit. And it's, that's what all these type of companies are, what they're called as commercial cults. That's what they do. And it's like, it's supposed to be they bill that as family oriented, and it's not. And it takes it takes time away from your family and away from your community, and then puts you in this very stringent, this is how we do things, this is what's right and true, and this is the way that it is. And it limits your thoughts to anything outside that, and limits your thoughts to, blocks you from experiencing, or not experiencing, it blocks you from dealing with grief. It blocks you from, I think, trying to, in some ways, talk to my family about going through a really hard time wasn't available, because you don't know how to access that. And maybe that's part of the importance of solidarity to me, where that is what is needed. But I want to hear your other thoughts on the.
I think I texted you, but I was like not even halfway through the first episode of it, and I was like, this woman's voice is driving me up the wall. It's just more a personal thing. I've never really. I feel like once you've seen one MLM, multi-level marketing, like self-presentation, you know how you get it. You get how it's going to go, the beats. I forget which episode it was, but they started talking about someone like the behind the scenes training that the woman would do. And I just thought, wow, this is very interesting. One, this is what she thinks is appropriate to train women on. But also, like, that was just very familiar gender teaching.
And
this a little bit new to me. And it's one of those things, it's like, you get enough distance from it and you're going, this is even weirder than I thought.
And I think this type of thing is what I think of immediately when I say disappointment or manipulation. And it's, you are responsible for these people who really want to have a good life for themselves. And what you tell them is control yourself, act in this way. This is how you have to be a woman. It limits.
You can only go so far here. Yes, the sky is the limit, but it's only the limit that I've set. The sky is I am describing what the sky is.
And you have to work 24 hours a day for me to get your freedom. And that's what is freedom. Like, it's such a weird dynamic, but it's like, I think this goes back to evangelicalism too, where it's like, people want a path. They want to be told how to be in the world. And then when you have to be a different way, it can be disorienting.
You also had recommended a memoir for me to read, What My Bones Know by Stephanie Fu.
By Stephanie Fu.
That was a bit harrowing.
I was diagnosed with complex PTSD for all things religious and commercial cult, and the things that have come out of that. Complex PTSD isn't one thing that happens. It's small things that happen, and then they carry on in your body and are pinged over and over again, which that's all a different thing to talk about. But I read a lot about it. And then when I found that book, and by diagnose, you're not allowed to diagnose someone with that, but that's what my psychiatrist said. But
I was also diagnosed with PTSD a few years ago.
We made it. But she came out with that book a few years ago, and I found it, and it was the first person account I had read that I was like, oh my gosh, yes. And hers came from abuse and was a completely different story, but so many of the things she wrote were so familiar to me. And I felt I connected with it so strongly, just the long-term anxiety living in your body, and how, abandonment issues, just like pain long-term, and how it makes you distrust. And I think when you asked me that, I was like, this is the book I've connected the most to in the past several years, for sure. And I think I'd back to that book, not a person I know at all in a different situation, but someone who I definitely connected with their story and the things they had tried and the things that had helped them, and connected with experiencing something that is small and then having it, or seemingly small, and then having it just like ping throughout your life and then be really big in your body, and trying to navigate how like we're going to deal with this thing that's coming up that is seemingly nothing, but also feels like a lot.
Yeah. I think when I was reading it, like my experience, thankfully neither of us have had that particular it was
Yeah.
harrowing to read it, so I can only imagine what it was going through it. But one of the things that I thought was really remarkable and really interesting was just her longing to do more than survive.
Yeah.
Like that's what really came through.
Yeah.
It was just she had been coping and surviving for so
Mhm.
long
Yes. Yeah.
and seemingly successful at a certain point,
Yeah.
and just realizing like it wasn't sustainable, it wasn't healthy. Like she didn't actually want to be living like that. And
Mhm.
so it wasn't until getting that diagnosis and trying to find her own path.
Mhm.
And I thought that like the therapist that she ended up with, like towards the end of the book, and the way that they ended up doing her
Mhm.
therapy, I was like, I would do that therapy. I would do that. But so what we're saying is, for anyone listening, we recommend reading the book if they're at all
Yeah.
curious or wanting to find it, because I think for me, it was just a really beautiful story of
Mhm.
listening to that longing for flourishing.
Yeah, and I think so at the end, part of the book is she talks about how she found like safety in her now husband's family. And I think that was one of growing up in several high control groups that prioritize marriage and a specific type of family more than anything else, is like something that has definitely pinged me negatively throughout my life that I still work through. But I think reading her, that was the first time I think I read something and I had a positive view of that being healthy for her, instead of being like, oh, you're kidding, she got married and it was better. And that was
Sure.
not her story at all. It was like, I found like a safe place and it just happened to be this. It could have been anything. And I think that I think it was meaningful to me that she framed it in the way that she framed it, and there wasn't any type of, saviorism in that book. It was like,
Sure.
here are all the
Yeah.
things that I tried. Here are the things that helped me. Here's where I found my first safe landing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, I appreciated that too. Cause I think, again, we grew up with our specific futures as women being very clearly defined or delineated or expected. We also grew up in a time and place where we did go to work. We did go find career. Like we ended up being professional women in spite of, or because of, or for whatever reason. And I've been thinking a lot, like I felt pretty steady since I was about 18 that I didn't want to have children. And when we were talking before we started recording, I said I felt like my 40s have been about loss. And one of the things that as part of that, is realizing that my window of biologically having children is just growing very small. And so I've been grieving that. And then I've been upset with myself for grieving something that I always said I didn't want. So what are you grieving at this point?
Yeah.
And I actually realized the other day, like I'm grieving the opportunity to change my mind.
I am really glad you said this, because I feel the same way, because a few years ago, I had a self-endectomy, which is I had my tubes removed because I knew I didn't want to have kids. I wanted to make a choice for myself. Now, that's what I did. I'm lucky to have access to that. And then earlier this year, I found out I had to have a hysterectomy sometimes you just have a big mass in your uterus and you have to have it taken out. Yeah. So my options were not, thankfully I'm healthy and it was not cancerous, but I had to have a hysterectomy, and I was like, sounds great to me. I already can't naturally. And I was like, so I had that a month and a half ago. And after I had it, I felt similarly. And I was like, this is interesting, because after I had my first surgery, I was like, yep, don't want to be pregnant. And I think also, I still having I think it was like a month and I was over it, but I think it's like what you're saying was true for me too, where it was like, oh, this isn't definitely not a choice anymore. Like, I literally have nothing in my body that will create a person. If it's like so much of your life is tied to one, having a uterus, even if you don't use it to have a child, and two, women are always connected to kids. So I think I unexpectedly felt, I don't know the name of it, but I just really had to think about it.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, and I still don't feel like I still don't feel like I'm sitting here going, I really wanted kids. Now, what choices can I make so that I have kids? Because I do think family can look a lot of ways, and to be in a role of parent can come about in surprising ways.
Yeah.
And going back to the topic of the podcast, it's just, it's hard to find people where I can look at and go, oh, here's how they're handling a similar situation. I just appreciate how I see them doing. I just don't feel like I have that. So I feel like I'm just out front with the machete in the wilderness.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've been lucky to have you, who is slightly older than me, and other people who are like the same life path, situation, whatever, as me to look to. But you have to actively seek out, okay, so not married, I don't have kids. I think the perception of that is you're a free person, but it's just more complicated than that. And it's not about, it's just more complicated than that. And it's also not.
We're all childless cat and dog ladies.
Yeah, I know. I have a dog, and I'm not a free person. I have a dog, but it costs me a lot of money to name the vet. Yeah. But I think, let's go back to, and it's complicated, and I'm not sad about it. And I think the choice you're talking about is important. And also sometimes I'm like, I wish I didn't have to like navigate this in this way. And also and also constantly, even though I have plenty of support, constantly take the perceived judgment off my shoulders, which I'm sure people who do have those things feel it in different ways too. But I think this comes back to understanding and solidarity, and realizing that not everyone's life is the same, and people navigate adulthood well with many different identities, and they should all be allowed.
Yeah. I think, like you had mentioned, that some of the theologians that I would love to hear who they are so I can go find them myself. Already such a strong tradition in the Catholic Church of single women doing and serving whatever we think of that particular institution. There's still that model in a way that I just don't feel like exists in what we have immediately accessible to us.
Yeah, I think that what we're both talking about is like the lack of ability to see yourself, because women are always talked about as attached, whether you're married or not, you're talked about as attached to men and kids. Seeing yourself as yourself is, you have to really go search for that. And then in addition to seeing yourself as other identities besides just your gender also.
Yeah. We have bodies, and those bodies present a certain way, and that means something for how we move through the world. But it's also doesn't have to be the only factor. So that's a whole nother conversation. But I would love to know, who are the theologians you mentioned?
My favorite theologian that I actually go back to a lot is Rosemary Radford Ruther, she wrote a book called Touchstones and God Talk, which I went in my early deconstruction just was screaming at me from every time I opened it. I was just like, oh my God, she's so smart. But she wrote this book that I really love, this short little book called Catholic is Not the Vatican, which is about, so she was like a traveling speaking theologian, and she dragged her husband and kids around with her everywhere, which I love. And a lot of what she used to talk about was anti-Semitism, and she would talk in Catholic churches about the importance of supporting Jewish people, and no one ever came to hear her talk, but she kept doing it. And eventually she said a lot of people started to come hear her talk, and she was like, what's going on here? I'm not popular. And then she found out that people were coming because there was like a anti-Palestinian sentiment growing. And she was like, I don't like that that's why you're coming to hear me. So she flipped what she talked about and started addressing that pretty directly. And I think that stuck with me because she had the opposite. It was like not about popularity to her at all. She was like, reinvestigated her beliefs when a lot of people started agreeing with her out of nowhere. She'd written a lot of really great things, and a lot of these people read about ecofeminism and things like that. So she's one of my favorite. Yvonne Gabarra is this Brazilian Catholic nun who she was ecofeminist too, but she wrote an essay where she said that abortion wasn't a sin. So that was a big deal with the Catholic Church. And they basically said, okay, she was silenced by the Catholic Church for a year and got a second PhD instead of, I don't know, wallowing in it. I don't know what she would have done, but just that where she was like, okay, that's fine. I'll go learn more. I think was so impressive, and to have that strong of a stance in her like religion and the place that she held is inspiring to me. There's the first queer theologian I read is Patrick Finn. He wrote pretty definitive 101 on queer theology. So I think that really just like gave me a lot of questions and reframed a lot of my thinking around feminist theology did too. But this like kind of would make me be like, wait, what? And then I would have to think more about my framework, that framework, as opposed to more feminist frameworks. I would be like, oh yeah, I definitely connect with that.
Sure.
So those are the ones I was thinking about when I came in here. Emily Towns is a great Black feminist theologian too.
Yeah. I know I've definitely heard of Radford Ruther. The other ones are new to me. So I'm probably going to follow up with you and links on that so I can find out more. It was interesting. I saw a clip not too long ago. Somebody on another podcast, and I don't remember who it was, and I wouldn't say even if I did, but this person was saying how if you use pronouns, like if you're using your pronouns or you're changing your pronouns, like you're putting yourself outside the family of God. And they were clearly very proud of themselves for coming up with
an original thought. Yeah,
I know. And I remember just going, and I just took the time, thought about it, because a family member had sent it to me, and it was just more of a, oh, what do you think of this than trying to start something. And so I just took a few days, and I was like, well, I'm just curious what made you send that to me. And it was just literally, I just wanted to see what you thought. And I said, since you asked, as I said, we can, I think you almost have to start with like, where do you define the family of God? And for me, that's very broadly. And if I'm being generous, if I want to be generous to what this person said, it would like, okay, embodiment, we are embodied creatures, and our sex and gender has a lot to do with how we move through the world. But we are created in God's image, family of God. And I said, but if we go to the New Testament, there's verses where Paul talks about nothing can separate you from the love of God. Like nothing, not height, nor depth, nor breadth, nor width, nothing you do can separate you. So I don't understand how you could say how changing pronouns put you outside.
Something so specific. I'm like short circuiting right now, but isn't there like a breath of creativity in the God that you say that you believe in? And is that not true for some specific things when it comes to gender and sexuality? And it comes back to, for me, you don't understand that what you're saying is cruel. Like this.
Exactly. And that was
cruel and it hurts people. And I know that people oftentimes don't have the ability to understand that, which is emblematic of growing up in such a structured environment that claims like freedom and creativity. I know people think they're proving something, but it's really cruel and it really makes the world dangerous for people. And I think I don't often have that conversation with people, but I think that's important for people to know. You don't have to understand anything, but sometimes when you think you got an aha moment, it really makes the world dangerous for people. It's not, you don't have to 100% understand to understand.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's what I thought
something like that.
too. Because you've literally just shut down any possibility of conversation.
Yeah.
If it was someone you, in theory, would want to minister to or walk with in some way, why would they come?
Yeah.
You know, what about this makes you think that they would want to come now?
Yeah.
And
if it's someone who is thinking about their gender identity, like why would they want to discuss with someone who automatically doesn't believe them?
Oh, right. Who says that there's, I happen to define family of God as anyone created. I'm like, if you can't start with that?
Yeah, it's just who's in and who's out, and let me know so that I can know that I'm in type of like, or we could just not, we cannot participate in that dynamic.
Right. Yeah. That was just I think what really got me was just the demeanor that, man, I've really come up with something.
And I was very,
So whole other conversation. Okay. Two more questions. First one, sign language here. First, it's not really sign language. What about this conversation has been most helpful for you?
When we were messaging about having this, I was like, I don't know what I'm about to say is not true, but it feels true. I'm in a point in my life where I'm like, what do I care about and want to be invested in? I just feel like I had to take a break from a lot of things I was invested in I needed a break. I had to do a lot of therapy and I had to on my couch with my dog and I had to have major surgery and I had to do a lot of things. And I think I'm coming out of some of that and trying to reconnect in a new way with the things that I care about. So this has been helpful to me in reminding me. I think the world is very overwhelming right now if you care about stuff like we've been talking about. And so I think I'm a little unsure where to plug back in. So I think this has been, I still don't have any answers, but this has been helpful in situating myself a little bit. Yeah.
No.
And like I said, I don't talk much about growing up in a commercial cult, even though it had a huge influence on my life and psyche. So I think talking about it for 5 minutes was, again.
I think that was actually helpful for me, even just that, not realizing how formative or malformative that was for you, even though a lot of overlaps and similarity with the evangelical part, which is in and of itself a whole can of worms. So thank you. I'm glad that this conversation was able to help with that.
What about for you? What was your takeaway?
One of my hopes in having these conversations was just to refine or open up or challenge my own thoughts about the concept of role models. And I think that our discussion around disappointment and manipulation is just such a key part And those specific words, actually, like that specific vocabulary was really helpful for me. And again, because it goes back to that idea of responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we're so frustrated. We have no role models. No, we do. We just don't like the ones we have. And the reason we don't like them is because they're also very clearly not taking responsibility for themselves.
Yeah.
And for the impact that they're having on the world.
And they're like looking to be in that type of position of power. And just even thinking back on like the list of theologians I mentioned, for like none of them care about, to my knowledge, care about having any type of power. Like,
I think that's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is even just like sitting and talking to, we've known each other a very long time, but when was the last time we sat and talked for 2 hours about stuff? I think that's super important.
Yeah.
And connective. And a type of, like I was saying, like we've been saying, people can be role models for each other and take things from a situation and use that as like a step forward or a reminder that you're not the only one like yourself, and nothing is new under the sun, including your identities.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Last question. Fun one. What's the story of the best or the worst taco you have ever had?
Okay, this is hard because I live in Chicago that has a high Latino population, and we have a ton of good tacos.
It really reminds me I need to come visit soon.
Yes. So we have like little taquerias everywhere. So I cannot pick just one, but I will tell you my favorite taco is, there's this place in Wicker Park, Chicago called Big Star, and they have the best fish taco that I've ever had. It's my favorite, but literally any place around here is great.
Yeah. No, I got into tacos years ago. I had fish tacos in San Diego, and my family thinks I am crazy and that fish tacos are disgusting, but
the best.
It's so
plus.
Yeah.
Fried fish taco, yes.
Big Star Taqueria in Winter Park, Chicago.
Big Star is, we have a lot of tiny taquerias just around Chicago.
Okay.
So many have good. I cannot even pick out one. So many. Yeah.
Awesome. Ashleigh, thank you so much for what I knew was going to be. Listen, y'all, you don't know Ashleigh, but ever since I have known her, like one of our friends described her as just having her finger on the vein of cool. And that is still true today. Just my shot of cool for the week. I love it. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation, Ashleigh. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was really great.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I hope you found something that resonated with you and that helps you become more hopeful, creative, and wise in your own life. Please share this with someone who you think would love this conversation, and like, subscribe, and leave a comment or a review to boost the show. Shalom.